A name was whispered through the marble hallways of Renaissance Rome with both awe and disgust: Lucrezia Borgia. In this city, gold was more valuable than faith, and every confession was a plot. Some people saw her as an innocent pawn in her family's plans. Some people saw her as the Vatican's poison because she was the daughter of a pope, the sister of a killer, and the bride of politics. It was the height of the Renaissance when Lucrezia was born in 1480. Under the same gold ceilings, there was art, science, and sin. Rodrigo Borgia, her father, would become Pope Alexander VI. He was a man who loved power more than he cared about doing good things. She had a brother named Cesare Borgia, who was a general, killed people, and had a big dream of making his own kingdom out of the chaos of Italy. And in the middle of their plans stood Lucrezia, who had beautiful golden hair and was destined to help her family get ahead. She had a plan for her life from the time she was born. Every word she spoke, every dress she wore, and every marriage she got married were all tools that the Borgia name used. Languages, tact, and charm were taught to her not for love or school, but for business. Innocence was her shield and beauty her sword. People ran this world, and desire made it dirty. Lucrezia wasn't valuable for who she was, but for who she could be traded to. She got married for the first time before she turned 12. Her father used her like a coin in his big power game, aligning her hand with one royal house and then breaking it off when a better chance came up. The Borgias thought that relationships were as weak and easily broken as glass. Rodrigo Borgia's family's goals hit divine heights when he became Pope in 1492. The Vatican, which used to be a place of worship, became the hub of their political machine. She was the most sought-after woman in Europe, and now she was the Pope's daughter. Giovanni Sforza, her first husband, was not the love of her life. They married for power. The Sforza family of Milan was strong, and their help would make the Borgia family more powerful in northern Italy. The wedding was beautiful, with lots of silk, gems, and rumors of scandal. Rome celebrated, but not because they loved each other. But even in that beautiful moment, there was deception going on below the surface. Giovanni Sforza quickly understood what he was, a pawn that would be thrown away as soon as it was no longer needed. The partnership broke down after a few years. The Pope and Cesare said Giovanni was impotent, which was meant to make him look bad in public and get out of the marriage without any political problems. But everyone knew the truth. The Borgias wanted to make their partnership stronger, and they would rewrite the deal over Lucrezia's body. While her marriage ended and her image took a hit, the power of her family grew. People in Rome talked about how good she was, but the Borgias didn't care much. It was a way for them to get power. Italy's courts were full of rumors that spread faster than the plague. Lucrezia became both a symbol and a scandal, but no one really knew her. Poets called her the Golden Serpent, and priests called her the Bride of Corruption. Was she involved, or did she have no choice? Was her smile a lie or a sign of intelligence? The truth, like the Renaissance, was torn between being beautiful and falling apart. The second marriage Lucrezia had was darker and had more goals. This time, she gave birth to Alfonso of Aragon, the King of Naples' child by someone else. The union was meant to keep southern allies stable and protect Cesare's campaigns. But in Italy's political world, friendships were short-lived, and love was dangerous. Cesare became more and more suspicious as his goals grew. Every friend was an enemy, and every husband was a threat. Cesare became cold and effective when Alfonso was no longer needed, like a man who loved power over blood. In 1500, Alfonso was found stabbed many times under the moonlit arches of Rome. He had escaped the first attack, but Cesare made sure the second one would kill him. Lucrezia cried over his broken body, and her tears hit the bloody marble floors below. The whole world saw it as a disaster. For the Borgias, it was a must. In their world, love was weakness, and being cruel was necessary to stay alive. There were times when Lucrezia Borgia was used to make deals, hide crimes, and shut up people who were against her. But deep down, a mind sharper than a knife started to come to the surface. She found out that she could both use and be a tool. She didn't learn the language of power from academics. She learned it from people who killed for it. Men were drawn to her looks, but her silence turned them off. As the bells of St. Peter's rang above the city and echoed through the bloody streets of Rome, Lucrezia had completely changed. No longer was she her dad's daughter or her brother's pawn. She was beautiful, smart, and cruel when she felt trapped. She was the personification of the Renaissance. People would remember her as a figure of sin, but she was actually a much more dangerous person. A woman who learned to stay alive in a world that was meant to eat her. The wedding of Lucrezia Borgia and Alfonso of Aragon was meant to symbolize peace. It was, instead, an omen. The year was 1498, and Rome gleamed like a serpent in sunlight. The Vatican had never been richer, nor more corrupt. Under Pope Alexander VI, the Borgia family ruled Italy not through holiness, but through fear and seduction. And in the center of this glittering empire stood Lucrezia, barely 18, wearing a crown of gold and a heart surrounded by walls of intrigue. Her new husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was young, handsome, and, most importantly, useful. His marriage to the Pope's daughter united the Borgias with the Kingdom of Naples, creating an alliance that could challenge the powerful states of northern Italy. For a brief moment, it seemed that love and politics might coexist. Alfonso adored Lucrezia, and for the first time she appeared genuinely happy. But in the House of Borgia, happiness was the most dangerous illusion of all. While Lucrezia played the role of devoted wife, her brother Cesare Borgia was transforming himself from a cardinal into a warlord. He had cast aside his church robes for armor, his sermons for strategy. He sought to conquer Italy through cunning, betrayal, and terror. Every alliance, every marriage was a tool in his campaign to carve out a new empire. And soon he began to see Alfonso not as family, but as an obstacle. Alfonso's bloodline tied him to Naples, a kingdom that threatened Cesare's ambitions. When the French army invaded Italy and Cesare allied himself with King Louis XIII, the political map shifted overnight. Alfonso's existence now complicated the Borgias' loyalty to France. Cesare's solution was simple: remove the complication. At first, the signs were subtle. Alfonso was isolated from court affairs. His allies disappeared. Rumors spread that his correspondence was being intercepted, that assassins moved in the shadows near his chambers. Lucrezia, trapped between love and loyalty, pleaded with her father to protect her husband. But the Pope was already looking the other way. Politics demanded a sacrifice, and the Borgias had never been squeamish about blood. On a hot July evening in 1500, beneath the marble colonnades of St. Peter's, the trap was sprung. As Alfonso left the Vatican to attend Mass, masked men attacked him. Swords flashed, steel met flesh, and his cries echoed off the stone. When the guards arrived, they found him drenched in his own blood, barely alive. Lucrezia rushed to his side. Her gown streaked crimson as she cradled him in her arms. For days, she refused to leave his bedside, nursing him through fever and agony. But Cesare was patient. He had failed once. He would not fail twice. One night, while Lucrezia slept, a man entered Alfonso's chamber, one of Cesare's soldiers. The attack was quiet, efficient, merciless. A garrote around the neck, a silent struggle, then stillness. When Lucrezia awoke, her husband was dead, his lifeless body laid upon cold marble. The official story claimed illness. Rome, however, whispered the truth. Cesare had ordered his death. The murder of Alfonso sent shockwaves through Italy. To the public, it was another Borgia scandal. To Lucrezia, it was the final betrayal. She had lost everything: her love, her innocence, her illusion of safety. Yet, even in mourning, she understood her place in the machinery of power. She could not accuse her brother, nor defy her father. The Vatican walls were thick with spies, and tears could be fatal. So she played her role, the grieving widow, the obedient daughter. And behind that mask, something inside her hardened into steel. Rome's gossip turned her into myth. They said her tears were poisoned, that she carried a vial of venom in her jeweled ring, that her beauty was a trap and her perfume, death. They called her the Bride of Blood. But the truth was more tragic. She was learning to survive the only way a woman in her position could, by turning her pain into power. When Alfonso was buried, Lucrezia did not faint or scream. She stood silent as marble, her eyes fixed on the cross above his tomb. Her silence terrified the court more than any curse. Cesare watched her carefully. Perhaps he saw his own reflection, ambition wrapped in grace, cruelty disguised as calm. For all his strength, Cesare understood that Lucrezia possessed a different kind of weapon, the power to endure. The months that followed changed her completely. The Pope, aware that sympathy for Lucrezia was growing, used it as political theatre. He sent her away from Rome to manage the Duchy of Spoleto, a move that appeared merciful but was designed to cool the scandal. Alone for the first time, Lucrezia discovered something she had never tasted before: control. She governed the city efficiently, won the loyalty of its people, and ruled with a diplomacy that impressed even her father. The girl who had once been traded between kingdoms now commanded one of her own. But power, once given, must be tested. When Cesare rode north on his military campaigns, rumors followed him, whispers that he and Lucrezia had shared more than ambition. The Italian courts fed on such scandal. It made monsters out of mortals. Lucrezia learned to use these whispers as armor. If they feared her as a temptress, she could not be dismissed as a fool. She began to write letters in code, conduct alliances in secret, and build her own network of influence beneath her family's empire. The daughter of sin had learned her father's art, the politics of silence. By the dawn of the new century, the world no longer saw Lucrezia as a pawn. She was now a player. The woman who once cried over her murdered husband now smiled as she toasted the men who had ordered it. Her beauty had not faded. It had sharpened. It was no longer a mask, but a mirror reflecting the hypocrisy of those who had shaped her. The Renaissance loved to paint saints, but it also worshipped sinners. And none shone brighter or darker than Lucrezia Borgia, the woman who learned that in Rome, the only true virtue was survival. By the start of the 1600s, Lucrezia Borgia had already lived 3 lives: that of a dutiful daughter, a grieving widow, and a scandal that was talked about behind closed doors. But she and the world were both changing. Over time, the Pope thrones that used to protect her family were giving way to their own corruption. Pope Alexander VI, her father, was getting old. People feared and were after Cesare because of his wars. The power that looked like divine at first was now in need. For the Borgias to find a new ally in this mess, Lucrezia's hand was once again the key. The next man she would marry would not be someone she loved or looked up to. It would be a shield, a political deal meant to keep the family's power from going away. The groom was picked to be Alfonso d'Este, who was the heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. The Este family was one of Italy's most prestigious royal families. They were known for being cultured, smart, and modest, which is not what the Borgias were. Europe would think Lucrezia's name was clean again after the marriage, or at least its flaws would be hidden by gowns and pomp. When the idea got to Ferrara, no one was interested. The Este family knew what the Borgia family was known for. Rumors of poison, sex, and murder spread faster than Pope orders. At first, Alfonso himself said no, calling the match a union with scandal itself. But politics brings people together who don't usually get along, and in the end, both the Pope and France put pressure on Ferrara, which hurt his pride. They were married for real in 1501. Lucrezia Borgia's 3rd wedding would be both her last and her first. On the way to Ferrara, there was a show as grand as a wedding. When Lucrezia arrived, she brought so many slaves, jewels, and gold that people lined the streets to see the famous bride. The sunlight seemed to bounce off of her carriage as if she carried the glory of Rome with her. It was true that Lucrezia was beautiful, but she also brought ghosts with her: the blood of Alfonso of Aragon, the shadow of Cesare, and the eyes of the world waiting for her next sin. When she walked into Ferrara, no one spoke. The city and its nobles were on high alert. But Lucrezia, who was always able to adapt, knew what her new battlefield was like. She walked slowly, spoke softly, and welcomed people with grace. She was both a sinner and a queen at the same time. She was never too proud or too humble. After a few months, doubt started to fade. The Duchess of Ferrara was not the snake that reports said she would be. She was well-educated, kind, and incredibly smart. But don't get it wrong, she wasn't there to be loved. She was now in charge. Ferrara quickly turned into her stage. While her husband liked to hunt and fight, Lucrezia made the ducal court one of the most important places for art and diplomacy during the Renaissance. She asked poets, scholars, and artists to come. She asked for theatre, music, and art. The court turned out to be very beautiful and peaceful when she was in charge. People who saw her said she was both beautiful and cunning. She was no longer her father's daughter. She had made her own life, becoming a goddess of manners. But tragedy followed her around as she built this new life. Early in 1503, her father, Pope Alexander VI, passed away. In an instant, Rome turned against the Borgias. Cesare used to be unbeatable, but now his enemies were after him like wild animals. It only took days for the kingdom of sin to fall, and through it all, Lucrezia stayed in Ferrara alone and unharmed. The world that used to need her now does. Lots of letters came from Rome. Cardinals were looking for alliances and nobles were pleading for forgiveness. People used to call her a sinner, but now they see her as a diplomatic safe haven. She learned how to keep up her image of modest virtue while negotiating peace between countries. She turned into the Borgia her father had always wanted, one who could live in the daytime. But she had to pay for the mask she wore. When she smiled in public, it was calm, holy, and untouchable. In private, her letters showed that she was tired and missed her family. She felt sorry for her father, scared for Cesare, and sad about the lives they had lost to get power. But she also admitted something else. She was becoming more and more dependent on control. She wrote once, "I have learned that those who cannot control their hearts are ruled by others." She learned deep down that being kind without thinking was the same as killing yourself. By 1507, Lucrezia had completely changed. More than anything else, she was free from the bonds of her family's sins. She was duchess, mother, diplomat, and ruler. The scandals that used to follow her around now helped her fame. Poets said she was like Venus, and artists painted her as a saint. And the world that had once judged her was now trying to help her. She had turned her shame into a tool. Still, the irony of her victory was mean. The power that had once kept her safe started to eat her up. The castle hallways were full of laughter and jealousy at the same time. Her marriage to Alfonso was proper but cold. It was more of a business deal than a love story. Having to stay alive had turned her heart into rock. The woman who had learned to deal with hardship turned into a statue, loved and respected but completely alone. Lucrezia saw her world change again as the years went by. Every kingdom had the seeds of its own downfall, and the Renaissance was no different. The same desire for beauty that led to the building of churches also led to bad behavior. When she got sick, she didn't see herself as a victim. She saw herself as a leader who had long known what it meant to live. She passed away in 1519 when she was 39 years old. She left behind children, art, and an image that was both bad and good. History would remember her not for who she was, but for what it needed her to be: a seductress, a saint, or a snake. But maybe the truth was easier to see. There was nothing bad or good about her. There was no one like her in her time. She turned surviving into art, sin into strategy, and scandal into fame. On her last night, the bells of Ferrara tolled in mourning for the Duchess. But the city also mourned the last word of a world where power and beauty danced together until they both stopped. When Lucrezia Borgia was laid to rest in the convent of Corpus Domini in Ferrara, the bells tolled softly, too softly for the weight of the legend she left behind. For those who had known her, she was a duchess, a patroness of art, a woman who had turned pain into power. But for the world beyond Ferrara's walls, she was something else entirely, a ghost draped in silk, forever tangled in the sins of her family, The Borgias were never just a family. They were a warning. Their rise from Spanish obscurity to papal dominance had been as fast as it was blasphemous. Pope Alexander VI ruled the Vatican like a dynasty, not a church. Cesare Borgia waged holy wars in the name of ambition, and Lucrezia, the daughter, sister, and pawn caught between them, became the living embodiment of their corruption. Whether she deserved that title was irrelevant. History rarely remembers truth. It remembers stories, and the stories about Lucrezia Borgia were irresistible. For centuries, her name would echo in whispers: the poisoner, the temptress, the papal courtesan. They said she kept a hollow ring filled with arsenic to slip into the goblets of her enemies, that her father and brother used her bed as a political stage, that her beauty was a weapon and her innocence an illusion. These tales began while she was still alive, spread by rivals and chroniclers who understood that reputation could destroy what armies could not. The Borgias had many enemies: cardinals, nobles, kings, all eager to soil the name that had humiliated them. Pamphlets circulated through Europe, painting her as a siren of Rome, a witch of the Vatican. And the irony was cruel. While men murdered, betrayed, and poisoned in plain sight, it was Lucrezia whose hands were forever stained in rumor. But myths, like empires, serve a purpose. And Lucrezia's myth served everyone. To moralists, she was proof that beauty was dangerous. To feminists centuries later, she became the symbol of resilience, a woman surviving in a world built to destroy her. To artists, she was muse and monster both. Painters rendered her face in golden halos and serpent smiles. Playwrights made her the mother of sin. Poets swore her name was sweeter than poison. The truth, of course, was far less theatrical. The real Lucrezia Borgia had governed Ferrara with intelligence and grace. She negotiated peace between feuding nobles, protected refugees during wars, and built hospitals and schools. She supported the arts, transforming the duchy into one of the Renaissance's most vibrant cultural centers. But history had no appetite for virtue. Her story sold better as tragedy, and every great civilization needs a villain to cleanse its conscience. As centuries passed, her name became shorthand for corruption itself. When Europe looked back on the Renaissance, it saw the Borgias not as patrons of beauty, but as architects of sin. Popes would later denounce them. Historians would call them a family born from the devil's own ambition. And yet, in that condemnation, there was admiration. For all their wickedness, the Borgias had achieved what every noble dreamed of: absolute power. Lucrezia's greatest sin was not poison or lust. It was her ability to survive among men who could not. In a world ruled by patriarchs, she had outlived her father's disgrace and her brother's downfall. She had remade herself not once, but 3 times, as daughter, duchess, and ruler. She had learned the art of invisibility, mastering silence as both weapon and shield. And even in death she refused to fade. The whispers that damned her also preserved her. Centuries later, when the Vatican cleaned its archives and historians began to unearth letters and records, the truth started to emerge. They found Lucrezia's correspondence: tender, disciplined, intelligent. Her letters spoke of love for her children, her devotion to her duchy, her faith in mercy. There was no trace of venom, no secret code of murder. She was not the spider Rome imagined. She was the web itself, patient, intelligent, impossible to destroy. Yet the damage was already immortal. In the 19th century, Romantic writers resurrected her myth with renewed fascination. Victor Hugo's play Lucrezia Borgia and Donizetti's opera transformed her into a tragic heroine, seductive, guilty, yet redeemable. The world that had once cursed her now pitied her, but even that pity was a lie. It still defined her by the men who used her: the Pope's daughter, the general's sister, the husband's widow, the woman of scandal. Never simply Lucrezia, her image became a mirror reflecting the obsessions of every era: desire, power, fear, and sin. To the Victorians, she was forbidden beauty. To the modern age, she is a reminder that history is written by the survivors and rewritten by those who envy them. The Borgia name still carries the taste of blood and perfume, politics and decay. But if one listens closely through the centuries of distortion, Lucrezia's voice remains. Not loud, not defiant, but calm, poised, unbroken. She is the whisper in every tale of a woman blamed for the sins of men, the ghost that lingers in the marble halls of power, the shadow behind every portrait of perfection. And perhaps that is the final weapon the Borgias ever forged, not armies, not alliances, but myth itself. A myth so enduring that 500 years later, the world still cannot decide whether to fear Lucrezia Borgia or admire her. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between, in the quiet strength of a woman who learned that power, once taken from her, could be reclaimed through memory. And so, when the bells of Ferrara faded into silence, history did not bury Lucrezia, it immortalized her. People still remember the name Lucrezia Borgia like a sweet, deadly piece of forbidden fruit, even though she is dead. Every age looks at her story and sees what they want to see: temptation, corruption, beauty, power, or beauty. People have painted her as a monster, sung about her as a saint, called her a whore and made her a queen. There are hundreds of years of writing and rumors that hide the truth, which is scarier than any story. Lucrezia wasn't just a woman of her time, she was a symbol for all women who have to live in systems that were made by men. Her life was full of tricks, but she learned how to get through them without forgetting who she was. The world saw her as a scandal, but history saw her as the very essence of life. At that time, men spoke a language of power that was written in blood and signed with alliances. But Lucrezia learned to speak it easily by being quiet, being elegant, and being very careful. Fights were going on outside the city walls, but her fights were whispered, looked at, and signed. She used marriage as a plan, parenting as a way to be polite, and even her shame as a way to get what she wanted. She built a strong reputation with every incident that was meant to bring her down. Still, her story is not one of victory, it is one of discovery. This shows how society honors power while judging weak people who learn how to use it. The same people who praised Cesare's cruelty also cursed Lucrezia's drive. The same people who praised her father's cleverness put down her own. She only did one wrong thing. She knew too much about how to survive. Her last few years in Ferrara were calm and quiet. But there was a deep tiredness in that calm. It was the tiredness of a woman who had carried too many masks, too many losses, and too many demands. Not power, but peace can be seen in her writings from that time. She hid herself away more and more in the convent at Corpus Domini, where the sounds of prayer drowned out the chatter of the court. The poisoner was known by everyone, but the real Lucrezia spent her last nights praying for forgiveness for sins she had never done. In 1519, when she was only 39 years old, she died giving birth to her last child. It was a fitting end for a woman whose life was full of both making things and destroying them. The walls of the order that held her body could not hold her name. In Rome, people talked about the end of a curse, and in Ferrara, they talked about the death of a queen. But time had already made up its mind. History would remember her and write about her. Her story only got bigger over the years. In art, she was the Renaissance Madonna who had been tainted by desire. In literature, she was the perfect example of the fatal woman, divine, dangerous, and impossible to refuse. She cried over poisoned cups and kissed men before they died in operas and plays. It was said that Lucrezia Borgia lived on in story, but the truth about her soul was slowly going away. Still, this might have been her last win. In the end, she got what every king, artist, and pope of her time wanted: to live forever. Not by being good, not by winning, but because they are interested. Lucrezia's story has stood the test of time because it shows a truth that everyone can relate to. Power isn't just about winning battles. It's also about keeping going. She showed that just being alive can be a form of protest. She used silence as a technique in a world that told her to be quiet. In a society that valued purity and shamed desire, she made both of them into armor. The Renaissance may be over, but its spirits live on in every workplace, courtroom, and palace today. These are still places where ambition smiles and beauty hides design. Every woman has to deal with a world that loves her for what she is and fears her for what she could become, just like Lucrezia Borgia did. Some people still think of her as the Vatican's dark witch. Others see her as the first modern woman because she is politically smart, mentally aware, and able to change quickly. She might have been both. That difference might be the point. What she left behind is not a lesson. It is a question. Can innocence live in a world of power? Is beauty possible when there is no control? Is it possible to remember a woman for her strength instead of her sin? The story of Lucrezia doesn't answer these questions. Instead, it makes us face them. Her world of velvet and shadow is long gone, but its framework lives on. The Borgias live on every time history repeats itself in the name of order, ambition, or faith. They smile through the chaos and whisper in marble halls, telling us that progress often comes with a mask of corruption. As the last light burned next to her grave, Lucrezia may have realized what all great survivors do. Power fades, but perception lasts forever. The world could change her story, insult her and praise her, but it could never get rid of her. Because power goes away, beauty fades, an empire falls. But myths live on, and Lucrezia Borgia, who was both a sinner and a saint and a shadow of Rome, became a story that lived on after them all.